We have a very specific image of what a strong mind looks like. It looks like someone who never wavers, who walks into difficult situations without hesitation, makes decisions without second-guessing them, and moves through the world with a kind of psychological armor that nothing quite penetrates. But that image is not what mental strength actually looks like. That image is performance. And performance is not the same thing as strength. Real mental strength tends to be quiet. It tends to look, from the outside, like ordinary life. And it is almost never recognized by the person who has it. Because the people who have genuinely developed psychological resilience are, as a rule, the least likely to be certain of it. Today we're looking at 10 signs that you have a stronger mind than you give yourself credit for. None of them dramatic, all of them real. Sign 1. You feel your emotions fully, without being run by them. Here's the paradox that most people get backwards. Feeling things deeply is not a sign of emotional weakness. It is one of the clearest signs of emotional strength. The person with a truly strong emotional foundation does not feel less than others. They often feel more. What's different is the relationship they have with what they feel, the capacity to be in the emotion without being entirely at its mercy. Psychologist Susan David, whose work on emotional agility has shaped much of modern emotional intelligence research, makes a distinction that matters here: the difference between having emotions and being fused with them. Someone who is fused with their anger becomes their anger in the moment. There is no space between the feeling and the action it produces. Someone who has developed emotional strength feels the anger fully, recognizes it, and still retains the ability to choose what comes next. This is not suppression. It is not the controlled presentation of someone who has learned to keep everything internal. It is the genuine experience of feeling something and being able to hold it without being swept away by it. To be moved without losing your footing. If you've ever noticed that you can be in the middle of something genuinely difficult and still, somewhere underneath, retain some sense of yourself, that is not detachment. That is one of the rarest things the nervous system can learn to do. Sign 2. You can sit with uncertainty without forcing a resolution. The decision hasn't been made yet. The situation hasn't resolved. You don't know what's going to happen, and there is no additional information available that would help, and you can be there. Not comfortably, uncertainty is rarely comfortable, but without reaching for a premature conclusion just to have something solid to hold. Most people experience unresolved uncertainty as a problem that needs solving. The mind generates answers, sometimes wrong ones, often distorted ones, simply to escape the cognitive discomfort of not knowing. This is why people jump to conclusions under stress, why ambiguous social situations get filled in with negative interpretations, why the gap in information tends to be populated by the worst available assumption. The ability to tolerate uncertainty, to genuinely stay with "I don't know yet" rather than manufacturing a resolution, is one of the most consistently identified markers of psychological maturity across multiple research traditions. Poet John Keats called this quality negative capability, the capacity to remain in doubt without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. You don't have to be comfortable with not knowing. You just have to be able to function while you don't know. And if you can sit in the ambiguous middle without collapsing or forcing closure, that is a form of mental strength most people spend a lifetime trying to develop. Sign 3. You've chosen. Difficulty over comfort. When it mattered, not every time, not even most of the time, but there have been moments, specific ones if you think about them, where the comfortable option was available and you didn't take it. You had the conversation you'd been avoiding. You made the call you'd been putting off. You stayed in a difficult situation long enough to learn something from it, rather than exiting before the discomfort peaked. You showed up for someone when showing up cost you something. Psychologist Angela Duckworth's research on grit, the combination of passion and perseverance over long time horizons, found that the capacity to choose difficulty over comfort in service of something that matters is one of the strongest predictors of long-term outcomes across almost every domain of human performance. Not talent, not intelligence, not resources. The willingness to keep going when stopping would be easier. The choices you made toward difficulty probably didn't feel like strength when you made them. They probably felt like obligation or stubbornness or the absence of a better option. That's what actual courage tends to feel like from the inside. Not heroic, just harder than the alternative. But looking back, each of those moments is evidence of a nervous system that has learned it can do hard things, and that knowledge compounds. Sign 4. You hold yourself accountable without destroying yourself. When something goes wrong and you are part of why, what happens next matters more than most people realize. There are two unhealthy patterns here, and they are more common than the healthy one. The first is externalization, finding a reason the situation was not really your fault, distributing the accountability elsewhere, protecting yourself from the discomfort of having contributed to a bad outcome. The second, and in some ways more corrosive, is over-internalization, taking on more than your actual share of responsibility, spiraling into self-criticism, turning a mistake into a verdict about your fundamental character. The healthy pattern sits between them, and it is deceptively simple. I made a mistake. I contributed to this. I understand what I'd do differently, and I'm not going to spend the next 3 weeks making myself pay for it. Researcher Kristen Neff, whose work on self-compassion has fundamentally changed how psychology understands healthy self-evaluation, found that the people who hold themselves most accountable over time, who actually learn from their mistakes and change their behavior, are not the harshest self-critics. They are the ones who can acknowledge failure with honesty and treat themselves with the same basic kindness they'd extend to someone they cared about. Accountability without self-destruction is harder than it sounds. It requires holding two things simultaneously: the genuine recognition that something went wrong, and the refusal to let that recognition become an indictment of your worth. If you can do that imperfectly, even usually imperfectly, you are demonstrating a kind of mental strength that most people never quite achieve. Sign 5. You've changed your mind about something you once held firmly. Think of something you believed strongly 5 years ago that you no longer believe in the same way. Not because you gave up, because you learned something. This is rarer than it should be. Changing your mind, genuinely, without the theatrical reluctance of someone performing open-mindedness, requires a specific kind of security. The security of knowing that your worth is not tied to the correctness of your current positions. That being wrong doesn't mean you are wrong as a person. In most social environments, changing your mind is still treated as a form of weakness, as inconsistency or naivety, or being easily influenced. This is backwards. The willingness to update your beliefs when the evidence changes is not intellectual weakness. It is one of the most reliable markers of a genuinely capable mind, which holds its positions with appropriate looseness rather than treating them as identity. Economist John Maynard Keynes, when challenged about apparent inconsistency in his views, reportedly said, "When the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir?" That disposition, curious rather than defensive, interested in being right rather than in having been right, is one of the quietest and most powerful things a mind can develop. You changed your mind. That's not weakness. That's exactly what a strong mind does. Sign 6. You can be wrong, out loud, without it threatening who you are. Two small words that most people find disproportionately hard to say. I'm wrong, not in private, not after lengthy deliberation, but out loud, in the moment, in front of whoever is there. The clean acknowledgement that a position you held doesn't hold, and you're no longer going to hold it. Compare this to the more common experience. The argument where someone produces an excellent counterargument and you find yourself defending a position you privately no longer fully believe, because the alternative is admitting in real time that you were wrong. The discomfort of that concession, the small social cost of it, turns out to be enough to override what you actually think. What makes public wrongness hard is not the wrongness itself. It is the belief, usually unconscious, that being wrong reflects on your intelligence, your judgment, your value, that it is a deduction from your standing rather than simply an update to your model. The person who can be wrong out loud has done something important. They have decoupled their identity from their current positions. They know at some level that what they think is always provisional, the best available approximation, and that when a better one arrives, the appropriate response is to accept it without theater. If you can do this, even sometimes, even imperfectly, you are demonstrating something most people spend years pretending to have. Sign 7. You protect your energy without needing to justify it. You said no to something, and you didn't spend 20 minutes explaining why. It sounds small. It isn't. Most people experience the need to decline something as a social debt that must be paid through sufficient explanation. The longer the explanation, the more clearly it communicates that the no was a reluctant necessity rather than a preference, that you're not the kind of person who just declines things without very good reason, but the person who has developed genuine clarity about their own limits, who has learned through experience what they can and cannot sustain, what costs them too much and what doesn't need the explanation as social cover. They are not declining in order to avoid the requester's disappointment. They are declining because they have accurate information about what they can actually offer, and the honesty to act on that information without elaborate apology. This is what healthy boundaries actually look like, as opposed to the version that gets discussed in self-help literature. It's not an aggressive declaration of limits. It's the quiet, non-defensive communication of reality, delivered without the preemptive guilt that says, I know this is an imposition. I'm sorry. Let me explain myself extensively so you know I'm still a good person. The no that doesn't need a paragraph is a sign of someone who has built a real relationship with their own capacity and trusts it enough not to require external permission to honor it. Sign 8. You can be present for people in pain without fixing them. Someone is in pain, not the kind that has a practical solution, not a flat tire, not a scheduling conflict, but the kind that simply is and needs to be felt before it can begin to shift. You stay. You don't reach for the silver lining. You don't reframe it into something more manageable. You don't offer the perspective that will help them see why this is actually an opportunity. You sit with them in it, not because you don't care about their well-being, but because you understand at some level that the caring that matters here is not the problem-solving kind. This is genuinely difficult. The urge to fix, to redirect, to move someone toward a more bearable emotional state is not an absence of care. It is usually the expression of care in the only form most people have learned to give it. Tolerating another person's pain without doing something about it requires a specific kind of steadiness, the ability to stay regulated while someone near you is dysregulated, without either dismissing what they feel or being swept into it yourself. Brené Brown writes about the difference between sympathy, which maintains distance, and empathy, which closes it. Empathy requires temporarily inhabiting another person's perspective without losing your own. That is a form of emotional strength that is both quiet and extraordinarily rare. If you have it, use it. The world runs short of it constantly. Sign 9. You've rebuilt after something that could have finished you. There's probably a specific thing, if you think about it. Something that arrived in a form you weren't ready for. A loss, a failure, a relationship that ended in a way that took part of your self-concept with it. A period of time when the version of yourself you'd been relying on stopped working, and you had to figure out who you were without the things you'd built yourself around. You're here. You got through it. That is not nothing. Psychologists who study post-traumatic growth, the genuine development that can occur in the aftermath of genuinely difficult experiences, have found that the people who grow through adversity rather than simply surviving it are not distinguished by the absence of difficulty. They are distinguished by what they do with the question the difficulty poses. Who am I, and what matters to me when the scaffolding is gone? Rebuilding is not the same as recovering. Recovery means returning to the baseline. Rebuilding means building something different from the materials available after the original structure is gone. It is slower than recovery, less neat, less linear, and it produces something that the original version could not have contained. You are not a before and after story. You are the ongoing result of everything you have survived and continued to build through. The fact that you're still here, still asking questions, still trying, that is already the evidence. Sign 10. You're still asking questions about yourself. This one might surprise you, but it's probably the most important sign on this list. A person who has stopped questioning themselves, who has settled into a fixed narrative about who they are and what they're capable of, has, in a meaningful sense, stopped growing. Not because growth requires perpetual uncertainty, but because growth requires the willingness to hold your current understanding of yourself as provisional. As good enough for now, but not the last word. The questions don't have to be comfortable. Am I becoming the person I want to be? Is not a comfortable question. Are the stories I tell about myself actually true, or have I been protecting them from evidence? Is not a comfortable question. Neither is, what am I avoiding and why? But the fact that you're asking them, the fact that you're here, watching a video like this, engaged in the project of understanding yourself better, is itself significant. Not because self-improvement content is a reliable shortcut to growth, but because the posture of genuine inquiry, the orientation of actually wanting to know rather than just to be reassured, is the necessary condition for any real change. The examined life is not comfortable, but the unexamined one has a particular kind of stagnation that is also uncomfortable. It just disguises itself better. You're still asking. That means the process is still alive. And the process being alive is exactly what matters. 10 signs. None of them about never struggling. None of them about arriving at some final, unassailable state of psychological security. What I hope you take from this is something more modest and more true. Mental strength is not a destination. It is a direction. It is the accumulation of small decisions to feel without being swept away, to sit with uncertainty, to say, I was wrong, to stay present, to rebuild, to keep asking, made imperfectly and inconsistently over a long period of time. You don't need to score 10 out of 10 on this list. You probably don't. Most people who are genuinely mentally strong will recognize themselves in 4 or 5, feel uncertain about 3 more, and honestly doubt the last few. That's fine. That uncertainty about whether you have it is, paradoxically, part of having it. The people who are most certain of their own psychological strength are often the ones still building the scaffolding. The people who are genuinely strong, who have been through things, who have rebuilt, who continue to ask honest questions of themselves, are usually the ones most aware of how much further there is to go. You are further along than you think, and the fact that you're not sure about that is, in a particular way, the point. If this resonated, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes the most useful thing you can offer someone is the evidence that the qualities they're not sure they have are already showing up in everything they do. Take care of yourself. We'll see you in the next one.